right, we're here. We're back here. We're going to be talking in part 4 of our lecture series pertaining to the female reproductive system, which is chapter 8 in the Language of Medicine by Davia Ellen Schaubner. In this segment of the lecture, we're going to talk about some of the pathology, the gynecologic, breast, pregnancy, and neonatal pathologies. We're going to talk about some of the clinical tests and procedures and some medical abbreviations that I would recommend that you know. So let's go ahead here and get started. Right, some of the pathology here pertaining to that of the uterus, we have a carcinoma of the cervix, which is when you have malignant cells that are in that cervix, which can eventually become very cancerous. The inflammation of the cervix itself is known as cervicitis. Cervicitis. The carcinoma of the endometrium is when you have a malignant tumor of the uterine lining, and endometriosis when you have the endometrial tissue that is located outside of that of the uterus. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the fibroids. Fibroids are benign tumors of the uterus, and we have several different kinds of fibroids here that are located in our diagram. We have here intramural fibroids. We also have subserosal fibroids, which are located here, but they protrude outward. The intramural fibroids here are masses, benign tumors, but they protrude into the uterus. Submucosal here is when they are located at the in this layer here, but they protrude also inward toward the uterus. Pedunculated vaginal fibroids here protrude on outward and then extend into the vaginal canal, and they have pedunculated fibroids here, which are at the fundus. This is structure here is known as the fundus, and they protrude on outward there. Okay. Now, the uterine artery embolization, or known as UAE, that's abbreviation, when you have tiny pellets that are injected into a uterine artery, and that blocks the blood supply to these fibroids. So there are little blood vessels that supply these fibroids with whatever nutrients they need, but by shooting them and blocking them here, it starves that particular mass of nutrients needed for them to keep growing. Therefore, it causes them to shrink. Now, this is an alternative to surgery where they actually have to make an incision into the abdominal cavity and go in there and to clip those fibroids off. This is an alternative to that. Now, some of the pathologies pertaining to the breast here, the carcinoma of the breast is, of course, known as breast cancer when a female here has a malignant tumor of the breast that arises from the milk glands and the ducts. Now, here's a misconception. A lot of individuals out there believe that breast cancer only happens for women. I've got news for you. Men also have breasts, and men can definitely have breast cancer, although the number of men that have breast cancer is much lower, and a lot of men usually don't talk about it, whether they have breast cancer or not, because it's not widely it's not the main audience that usually has breast cancer. Usually men remain silent when they have that. And it's quite interesting because the only machine that allows a healthcare professional to read a record of the breast is, of course, known as a mammogram, and the mammogram are specifically designed for female breasts. Okay, so the mammogram here has 2 plates, and what happens is that the patient would place their breast onto the plate, and the plate would kind of press onto the breast and then get a record image of that. That becomes tremendously difficult for some men, is because obviously men do not have a protruding breast, so they really have to try very hard to at least get as much breast tissue as they can in between those 2 plates in order to get a reading, a mammogram of the male breasts. Now, you're probably asking me, well, why don't they have an equivalent machine for male breasts? It's not developed yet, at least to my knowledge. It would be nice, but they don't have it, and there isn't a market, at least a big enough market, for someone to go and develop that. So obviously, if a male or man has breast cancer, we've got to use whatever tools available in society. Now, the most common type of breast cancer here is invasive ductal carcinoma. Now, breast cancer arises from a genetic condition where there is a mutation in these genes known as tumor suppressor genes. One of the genes here is known as breast cancer 1 gene, or BRCA1, and breast cancer 2 gene, or BRCA2. And these are found in at least half of the inherited breast cancers out there, and tests using DNA sequencing that can detect these particular kinds of mutations. Now, of course, as I've mentioned, these are tumor suppressor genes, so the presence and the activation of these BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes helps to limit or stop the cancer from becoming more prominent. Any mutation in these tumor suppressor genes will cause a break in the DNA strand, and therefore leading to mutation and ultimately to breast cancer. And we have here an image of a particular kind of carcinoma that is found there in the breast, quite there. Now, some of the cancers in the ovaries, obviously, if there's an ovary in the cancer, if there's a cancerous cells in the ovary, that would be known as ovarian carcinoma, where you have malignant tumor of the ovaries. In the fallopian tubes here, you can have pelvic inflammatory disease, abbreviated here as PID. And some examples of pelvic inflammatory disease include salpingitis, oophoritis, endometriitis as well. And the leading causes of these are from sexually transmitted diseases, or also known as sexually transmitted infections. Okay, the new vocab here, rather than saying sexually transmitted diseases or STDs, is now STIs. Some additional pathology here pertaining to pregnancy. We have abruptio placentae. Abruptio placentae is the premature separation of the normally implanted placentae. We also have ectopic pregnancy, which is the misplaced implantation of the egg. For example, the egg is supposed to implant itself into the uterus. So we have here our example of a uterus here, and the egg is supposed to go inside the uterus for implantation, but sometimes it doesn't happen that way. It doesn't travel far enough. You might get an implantation in the fallopian tube by accident. Yikes. This is tremendously painful for the mother, and so this is known as an ectopic pregnancy, implantation that is misplaced. So that would be a fallopian misplacement there. There is also placentae previa, which is the implantation of the placenta over the cervical opening or the lower region of the uterus. So we have here the cervix, and we have here the vaginal canal. The placenta happens to cover right there, make it make it impossible for the birth of the baby later down the road without surgical intervention. And preeclampsia here is an abnormal condition associated with pregnancy marked by high blood pressure, proteinuria, which is a condition of having high amounts of protein in the urine, edema, and also headaches. Other pathologies here pertain to the newborn. There is a condition here known as Down syndrome, which is a result of trisomy 21. Now, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes in each one of your cells. Okay, 23 pairs. In a normal adult cell, there are 23 pairs, giving us a total of 46. The first 23 came from your mother. In each of your cells, you have 23 from your mother and 23 of these from your father. Oh, from mom, from dad. Okay? You got 23 of those. And this whole cell here is you. All right. 23 from mom and 23 from dad. Now, at pair number 21, somehow, some way, a third chromosome landed itself into that cell, therefore leading to trisomy 21. That is a result of a misalignment of chromosomes during the dividing process, and that is a result of non-disjunction. There are these little whip-like ropes, okay, known as microtubules, and they attach to the chromosomes during meiosis to separate them out, and so that each of the cells have an even count. But somehow that whip kind of got broken, or maybe some mutation happened, so they didn't split those chromosomes up during the division process during meiosis. So therefore, 2 of them went to one cell versus 1 to 1 during meiosis. Okay, I'm not going to get into too much detail about that. A biology class can help resolve that. We're just going to stick to the basis. Down syndrome here is when a newborn has three chromosomes at the 21st pair versus having the traditional two. All right. Hydrocephalus here. Hydrocephalus is the accumulation of fluid in the spaces of the brain. So hydro is water, cephalo is head, us, okay? So accumulation of fluid in the spaces of the brain. Pyloric stenosis here is the narrowing of the opening of the stomach on the duodenum. Now, when a newborn is neonate or newborn is born, the healthcare professional assesses 5 different traits on the baby in order to determine its condition. First of these conditions here is the heart rate. Next one is its respiratory effort, its ability to breathe well. Next here is muscle tone. Next is a response to the catheter in the nostril. And the last one here is the color of the skin. And the scoring range here is between 0, 1, and 2. 0 meaning it's not there or very, very bad condition. For example, muscle tone is limp here. That would give it a score of 0. Or the skin is pale blue when it's actually supposed to be pink, will be given a score of 0. And here at 2 means that the heart rate here is over 100. The respiratory effort is very good in crying. It is very active, kicking, and very, very, very active. And then it's able to cough and sneeze here, and its skin is completely pink. So rather than in the operating room trying to describe, okay, the heart rate here is over 100, or the respiratory, the baby is crying well and very good, and the muscle is, the baby is active and kicking, just give it a number. Okay, heart rate 2, respiratory effort 1, muscle tone 2. So it's much quicker for the healthcare professional to assess the neonate. Okay, so that would be known as the APGAR scoring chart. You might want to know this. This is a good one. Now, different kinds of clinical tests out there in order to assess the condition of the female reproductive tract. The first one here is known as a Pap test or a Pap smear, and that is when there's a microscopic examination of stain cells that are removed from the vagina and the cervix. So you remove those and look at them under the microscope, stain the cells, and take a look at the condition. There is also a pregnancy test, which is when you take a sample of blood or urine and measure the amount of what hormone that we talked about earlier. That's right, measures the hormone of HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin. Different procedures that are used in order to assess the condition of the female reproductive tract. We can use X-rays as well. Let me see. Use X-rays. We can use ultrasound as well. An example of an X-ray here is mammography, which is the process of recording the breast tissue. There's also ultrasound as well. You can take an MRI of those tissues. Conization is Conization here is removal of the cone-shaped section of the cervix, and we can see here that the cone-shaped section here is being removed at that cervical region. Laparoscopic oophorectomy here is when an ovary is placed in the plastic bag here and then extracted through the laparoscope. So you can see it is removing the structure as well, cutting the end of the fallopian tube in order to remove that ovary. An amniocentesis, sometimes the amniotic fluid can contain a lot of information that will allow a healthcare professional to assess the condition of the developing embryo. An amniocentesis, where there is a surgical puncture into the amniotic sac to remove its fluid, can do just that. Okay, so you can see a needle placement. A needle is placed into the amniotic sac, and it is guided by ultrasound so that they can see where they're going, not just punching to random stuff. You need an ultrasound image so you can see where you're going. All right, some abbreviations I would definitely here want to know. For example, BRCA1 and BRCA2 in your notes, please separate those. Those are resembling of breast cancer 1 and breast cancer 2 gene. CVS, not to be confused with the pharmaceutical company chain, is chorionic villus sampling. CX here stands for cervix. C-section or cesarean section here is the is a medical process by which a baby is born not through the vaginal canal, but through an incision into the abdominal cavity and an incision into the uterus. Okay, and what the healthcare professional does is there is a anesthesiologist that numbs the patient. The physicians go in, make an incision into the belly region, abdominal region, pulls some of the tissue out, some of the fat cells out, and then gets straight into the uterus, and then makes another incision there where the baby is able to come out. When the baby is finally born, the placenta is finally released out, then they stitch back those regions, put back the organs, close up the abdominal wall, and allow the mother to heal. Another one here is FSH, which means follicle stimulating hormone. We have here HCG, or capital HCG here is human chorionic gonadotropin. OB stands for obstetrics. PID stands for pelvic inflammatory disease. PMS here stands for premenstrual syndrome. And you have UAE, which stands for uterine artery embolization. Well, I hope that you found this segment of Chapter 8, Part 4 very informative. I look forward to another lecture with you guys. Until next time, I will see you later. Good luck studying on this chapter, guys.